Start only because Melanie said that this is actually a 3-hour lecture, so we need to get moving as quick as possible. A couple of housekeeping items. First of all, this is the last grand rounds of the year. The next grand rounds will be on January 5th. So enjoy your free time for the coming weeks, and happy holidays to everybody. Today I have the pleasure of introducing you to one of our chief residents, Melanie Fillmore. Melanie comes from the great state of Idaho, and she's not the first resident we've had from Idaho, actually. So, but I'm glad to say that she's considering sticking around when she's done with her residency. So, she's become hopefully a Tucson native. Melanie graduated from the Utah State University with a degree in mathematics. And I don't know if many of you know this, but she actually taught for a number of years, junior high and high school kids, math and computers and etc. And that is why she will be teaching all of my children math, because I can't do any of it. My kid is in first grade and I'm already struggling. So. She went to medical school at Utah and joined us a few years ago, and she has done a great job ever since she's been here. It's been great having her. She is very smart, and probably the thing that impresses me the most is that she is extremely calm under pressure, and that comes in very handy, especially with the patient population she's interested in working with. So. Today she's talking about educating children about sex, and this is a particularly relevant topic for a lot of us, so I welcome her. The only other thing I want to add is that she has nothing to disclose with respect to any pharmaceutical sponsorship. So please help me in welcoming Dr. Fillmore.
The reason Dr. Heron has trouble educating his kids is because it's the new math. And I don't know if even I can do it anymore. So it's all these years of medical education. So my topic today is, are my kids, as a psychiatrist, I put that in, any better than your kids, or how to talk to your kids about sex. So I'm glad that Dr. Heron clarified, because I do have some disclosures. First of all, I talk fast when I'm nervous, so this 3-hour lecture may be condensed down to like 40 minutes, and we may get to go home early. I tried to get out of it, but Dr. Heron wouldn't let me. I did all my own work, even though this little guy didn't want me to. As far as HIPAA violations go, only my own children's names and faces are disclosed, but they chose to remain somewhat anonymous. We had some arguments and debates about how this would best be handled, and we finally came to an agreement. So, I want to talk a little bit about how this Grand Rounds topic came up, and have you meet a patient of mine, otherwise known as JC. So JC is a 35-year-old married Caucasian male with a history of ADHD and polysubstance dependence that's been in full long-term sustained remission, who came into 7OPC on 9/28/09 after having been referred by his couples therapist. I saw him for evaluation of medication management and individual therapy. My intake supervisor actually was Dr. Heron. He requested therapy to deal with issues related to family conflict, challenges negotiating differing parenting styles between himself and his wife, and coping with stresses surrounding relating to his then 8-year-old adopted son, who also struggled with ADHD. Some background information on JC. He was born and raised in California. His father left when he was 1.5 years old, and he lived with his mother, who was working at the time as a professional cook. His mother was an alcoholic, and she struggled to maintain housing. They were living in low-income housing, and when she was kicked out of that, they lived off and on with family members. His grandmother physically abused him. They lived from time to time with various boyfriends of his mother. And then from a period of age 8 to 14, he was involved with the Catholic Church, and there was a Catholic priest who sexually molested him during that time. At age 12, he began abusing alcohol and became quickly very dependent on alcohol. At about age 14, he began using other substances and used a variety of other substances, including marijuana, cocaine, LSD, but pretty much he would use whatever he could get his hands on. At age 14, he was kicked out of school because he was caught stealing a teacher's wallet. And at that time, he went to rehab for the first time. He was sent to a probationary school. The rehab didn't really work. He wasn't invested in cleaning up at that time, and his home life was still very troubled. He got a job, but was fired pretty quickly for not showing up there. He, from 14 to 19, had multiple misdemeanors, minor in possession, shoplifting, petty theft, public intoxication. He eventually dropped out of high school about 10th or 11th grade. He couldn't remember exactly when that happened, but because of his alcohol dependence and substance abuse. He was sent to rehab again about age 19 because of his substance issues and his interaction with law enforcement. And he cleaned up pretty well. He struggled with his mental health through this time and suffered with schizophrenic-like illness where he was very paranoid, was hearing voices. He was institutionalized for a period through that time, but spent a lot of the time on the streets. And amazingly enough, he was able to clean up. Had some relapses, but finally, about on January 14th, 1995, and he's very clear about this date, he took his last drink and cleaned up. He attributes his becoming clean and sober to AA. He's been very active in AA. And since that time, he's been able to get a bachelor's in accounting from Sacramento State University. He continues to be very active in AA through this time. He met his wife through AA. She has a very similar story and background to his, was physically and sexually abused growing up, lost her father at age 9, was not protected by the people that she lived with, had a very violent home and upbringing. And then she too cleaned up about in her teenage years and has long-term sobriety from alcohol and substances. They've been married now for about 4 years, and she has this son from a previous marriage, and then they have another son together as well. So what's the problem? Now he's here in Tucson, they're living here in Tucson, working as an accountant. He's active in AA, and he's struggling to figure out how to be a husband and father to these 2 young boys. When his father ran away, his mother escaped with alcohol, and the Catholic priest sexually abused him. And I'm the guide in that. And what are my qualifications? Well, this is my wedding picture. I got married the Christmas before I started my 3rd year of medical school, or of residency. So I have a blended family. These are my 2 children and my new husband. We now have a new baby, and I was just learning to do therapy when I picked him up. So I have a lot of experiences that were kind of similar and helped me to kind of relate to his experience. But that only explains half the topic. So there we are doing weekly therapy, and we're dealing with issues like how to get through the morning without yelling at each other, he and his wife, and we still haven't worked that one out. How to get his son, DC, to put his shoes on without a struggle, getting him to eat his vegetables, getting homework turned in, and so on and so forth. And one day, just because kids and patients like to keep us on our toes, JC finds out from the history on the computer that his son has been surfing pornographic websites. So now what? JC knows he has got to address the issue, take charge, and have the talk with his son. So his ideas from the session. We talked about maybe putting some internet controls on the computer, and he didn't want to do that because I'd rather know what he's looking at. He'll just find somewhere else to look at it if he can't access it at home. So his idea was I want to let him have free reign and be able to catch him at it. He thought, well, maybe I'll just buy him The Joy of Sex and give it to him, let him take it in his room. He can look at it, pull it out anytime he wants, then put it away under his bed, and at least it's tasteful, and it'll give him an explanation, and then I won't have to talk to him about it. We kind of talked through those ideas, and he decided, well, my wife and I can sit down with him, but at that they had a hard time coming together about, well, what are our values, what are our standards, and they couldn't even find a time when they could sit down together and talk about what was going on. So, in short, we have a long ways to go with therapy. So, and in my life at the same time, here's my little guy who was in first grade. And last year in our kids' school, there was a rash of increased sexual behavior among the older boys on the playground. And my kids go to an after-school daycare that's right on the school grounds. And in that daycare, they all interact together. So our young son was interacting with these older boys. And the first thing we heard about all this increased sexual behavior was our son would come home from school, tell us a joke. Here comes a punchline. He thinks it's funny. There's some double entendre that he doesn't understand, and we're like, oh, yeah, that's totally not appropriate. And he didn't have any idea what he was saying. Soon after that, our son, who has a poor frustration tolerance, got mad at another kid, hit him in the groin. And so here's something else that we've got to deal with, and we were like, where did that come from? And then a number of these older boys decided it would be a great idea to pull down their pants and moon everybody, and our son, who is a follower, joined right in. So, and here is another tiger tail. So this is what you want to see when you go pick up your son from LEAP. Your child, Logan Fillmore, was displaying inappropriate behaviors in the LEAP program. His actions included, during rug time, a child was sitting next to Logan on the rug, and the other child was doing a turtle position, playing with the other children. Logan turned toward the child and proceeded to poke the other child in his behind repeatedly. The staff attempted to redirect the child. Was he placed in timeout? Yes. If any kind of inappropriate behavior occurs in the future, your child will be suspended for 1 day of programming, thereafter a 2-day suspension, then suspension from the program for an entire year. So, fun things to deal with at home. Clearly this would not happen to other parents, but maybe it has. So that's where my whole Grand Rounds readings began. So there were 3 major focus areas when I began my Grand Rounds reading. First of all was timing. When we start to talk to our children about sex. When do we start? How young do we start? Where do we gear our talks? What influence does the media have on our children's behavior? And then technique. How do we talk to our kids? So to begin, a little bit about timing. When should we talk to our kids? Or when do we talk to our kids? Both those things I was interested in. So the first thing that has to happen is we have to get rid of the idea of the talk, or otherwise known as a one-time, all-inclusive disclosure of everything you know about the birds and the bees. Wipe your hands, I'm done. You know, we just dispel everything we know and get it off the deck. What's much more effective and helpful for children is a series of sexual discussions covering a broad range of topics that's appropriate for their developmental and emotional level. So we don't want to overwhelm our kids when they're too young, but we need to increase based on their age level and their developmental level. So topics should include ongoing discussions about puberty, family values, healthy relationships, pregnancy, and STD prevention. So clearly, my first grader is not ready for STD prevention, but at different stages, they can talk about our family values. They can talk about what looks good in a relationship. They need to know about puberty, and they need to know about it before they hit it. So we need to talk about them before they need to know about them. So we have to talk about pregnancy and STDs before they begin to engage in sexual behaviors. So how well are we doing at that? So there was a 2010 study in pediatrics looking at timing for parents, which was a randomized controlled trial of a worksite-based parenting intervention called Talking Parents Healthy Teens. And its goal was to help parents communicate with adolescents about their sexual health. So there were 13 large Southern California worksites that they recruited parents from, and parents had to have at least one 6th through 10th grader to participate. Parents completed a survey at work, and their adolescents were mailed the surveys at home. And they had an intervention in a control group. In this study, they didn't talk about the differences between those groups or really what they did differently between those groups. But they did surveys at baseline, 1 week, 3 months, 9 months, and then follow-up surveys at 3, 6, and 12 months. And it wasn't a bad-sized study. They had 141 parents and 155 adolescents. So they discussed a broad range of topics and assigned them to some categories and arranged them by approximate sexual stage in which they tended to be discussed. And they showed a difference between when parents reported that the topics were discussed compared to when adolescents reported those same topics were discussed. Now these tables, I'm sorry, they're pretty small, but I'm going to talk a little bit about what they show. So these are the general types of topics. So they talked about what qualities are important in choosing your friends. They would talk about male and female physical development, like how boys and girls' bodies change physically as they grow up, so puberty type topics. They would talk about consequences of getting pregnant or getting someone else pregnant, reasons why you shouldn't have sex, how you'll make decisions about whether or not to have sex, how you can prevent getting STDs, how well condoms work to prevent that, how to ask someone out on a date, how you'll know whether or not you're in love, the importance of not pressuring other people to have sex, what it feels like to have sex, how to use a condom, how to choose methods of birth control. And then they categorize those. Are they more about having sex in a relationship? Are they more about physical development? Are they more about STD and pregnancy prevention? Are they more about making healthy decisions? And then what they looked at is, when do parents say they talked about this? What sexual stage? And sexual stages were like, is it when the kids are reporting that they've not done anything, like no kissing, no touching, no intercourse? And when do kids report that they're talking about this? And the reason those tend to be different is sometimes kids don't remember that we've talked about it, although we've talked about it. So sometimes those tend to be a little bit different. So the categories that they graded them for the sexual stage are pre-kiss, kiss, so our kids had their first kiss, have kids started touching breasts, have kids started touching genitals, have kids started having oral sex, and have kids started having sex, intercourse. So that's, they graded sexual I can't think of a word, but as kids move along those stages. So what they found is parents tend to talk about topics in 3 broad categories depending on their child's corresponding stage. So whether they feel like their kids are in a pre-sexual stage, a pre-coital stage, meaning they haven't started having intercourse, or in the coital stage. During the pre-sexual stage, parents tend to talk about sex and relationships, so how to choose friends, homosexuality, why not to have sex, how to decide on sex, and female physical development, like pregnancy, girls' bodies, how they change, menstruation. And they talk some about how boys' bodies change and the consequences of pregnancy. And all those tend to typically fall in when kids are younger. When kids advance in age and stage, into the precoital stage, the talks tend to advance into STD prevention and birth control. More advanced sex and relationship topics like how to ask for a date, how to recognize when you're in love. More male physical development like masturbation and wet dreams. And making healthy decisions like not pressuring other people for sex, why people like sex, how to refuse sex. Then we're discussed in the pre-sexual stage. And then as kids start to initiate intercourse, then parents move along into communication about STDs and pregnancy prevention, and more sex in relationships and making healthy decisions. So on this next table, they looked at the timing of talks with the first sexual milestones, so in the precoital stage. So this would be a point of possible intervention with your kids. I don't know what happened to this slide. So what they looked at here is how many parents were talking about these topics before the kids started moving along in their sexual stage, and how many parents talked after the kids moved forward. So this is a place where kids are starting to touch breasts and have touch genitals, have oral sex. So this is moving along, but not initiating intercourse. And what they found is that a lot of kids are moving along, like here, reasons why your child should not have sex. 13.5% of parents are talking to their boys before they've initiated this act, and 40.4 are talking after. This doesn't add up to 100% because some of them are unclear whether it happened before or after. It happened about the same time, or some of them didn't report. So I'm not going to go through this whole table because I've kind of got the main gist of it here, kind of bigger. So at the point of first genital touching, about more than a third of parents reported that they hadn't discussed 14 out of the 24 topics. More than a half of the boys reported that they hadn't discussed 16 of 23 topics. So a lot of boys forget that we've talked about it, even though we have. Topics that they hadn't discussed included how to ask for a date in 62% of the boys, homosexuality in 36% of the boys, the importance of not pressuring others for sex in 41% of the boys, and how to use a condom in 81% of the boys. For girls, we tend to do a little bit better. So for some reason we talk to our girls a little earlier than we talk to our boys. But a third of parents reported that they hadn't discussed 12 out of the 24 topics. And a third of the girls reported they hadn't discussed 14 of the 22 topics. And the ones they hadn't discussed include how boys' bodies change, in half of them about, how to prevent STDs in 38%, how well does birth control work in 42%, how to refuse sex in 40%, and choosing a method of birth control in 61%. Okay. And then this third table looked at these same topics in relation to when adolescents are actually having sex. So same kind of thing. And one thing I wanted to point out is by this time, most parents have talked about how to choose friends, homosexuality, how boys change physically. So we're talking about puberty, we're talking about pregnancy, we're talking about consequences of getting someone pregnant, we're talking about reasons why you shouldn't have sex. But by this time, about half of parents still haven't discussed how to use a condom, how to choose a birth control method. And about 1 in 4 parents and daughters haven't talked about how to resist pressure for sex. And 2 in 5 haven't discussed how to choose a method of birth control or what to do if a partner refuses to use a condom. So the conclusions from this paper is that our timing of sexuality topics tends to be graded. So we talk about relationship topics and developmental issues mainly in the pre-sexual stage. We evolve more into decision-making and STDs with continued discussions of more advanced relationship topics in male development in the precoital phase. And then discussions center more on STDs when adolescents have initiated intercourse. And for the most part, that's probably a pretty good sequencing, but we're likely too late on some key issues. And we tend to talk earlier with our daughters than with our sons. And probably part of the failure for that is that parents don't know when their kids are starting to have sex, so they don't communicate early enough. And just on a side note, puberty makes a difference. This was a paper on puberty timing in Swiss adolescents. It was called the Swiss SMASH study. And this was a self-administered questionnaire study of about 7,500 adolescents from 16 to 20, asking about did they hit puberty early, late, or at average timing. And what they noted is that if girls mature early, they report an increased rate of dissatisfaction with their body image, with an odds ratio of 1.32, increased rate of functional symptoms, odds ratio of 1.52, and they report engaging in sexual activity more often, with an odds ratio of almost 2. If boys mature early, they're more likely to engage in sexual intercourse and legal and illegal substance abuse. The odds ratios varied between 1.4 and 1.99. And they have more dysfunctional eating patterns, victimization, and depressive symptoms. So if our kids are hitting puberty early, we need to talk even younger with them. So we need to know how that relates to sexual activity and risk and adjust our talks. And we need to have graded ongoing discussions about development, relationships, and sexuality. We need to make sure that we're talking to our sons as well as our daughters. So if we aren't talking to our kids, who is? So I just wanted to talk a little bit about my 10-year-old daughter. I sat down with her when I got a permission slip home from our school to send her to a maturation video. It was at another school. It wasn't the one at her school, and it was a little bit early. At her school, they did it in 6th grade. And so I thought, well, you know, we can just talk about this now. Would be a good opportunity. So I sit down, and I'm planning to have this novel and uncomfortable discussion with her. And as soon as we start, she says, "I know, Mom." Whew. We don't have to have this discussion. But then I thought, wait, what do you know? And who told you? And what don't you know, even more importantly? And it turned out what she did know was very slim. What she didn't know was very broad. And we really did need to have a talk. And if we're not talking to our kids, what they're learning from is probably the media, probably their friends, and probably inaccurate. So, an important note on the media. Popular music is becoming a lot more sexually explicit, with more direct sexual references and more graphic lyrics used to describe sexual behavior. The internet, just like with my patient, kids have easy access to hardcore pornography, and they're getting solicited by sexual predators in internet chat rooms. A recent survey found 1 in 4 children ages 10 to 17 had unintentionally encountered explicit sexual content, and 1 in 5 children had been exposed to unwanted sexual solicitation while online. And what about TV? The Kaiser Family Foundation does a survey of television content about every 3 to 4 years. The 2005 study found that the number of shows with sexual content had nearly doubled since 1998. They had one in 1998, one in 2001, and one in 2005, and it went up every year. The 2005 study showed approximately 70% of all shows include some sexual content, and these shows average 5 scenes per hour. This is compared to 56% of shows with some sexual content and 3.2 sexual scenes per hour in 1998. And kids are watching at higher rates. So this is their 2010 study of media use in kids. So there's my baby in the middle, and they're all doing their Wii. So 8 to 18-year-olds spend an average of 7 hours, 38 minutes using entertainment media across a typical day, which is more than 53 hours per week. And since so much of that time they spend multitasking, so they're using their iPods along with watching TV, they're using their cell phones while they're on the computer, they actually managed to pack a total of 10 hours and 45 minutes of media content into that 7.5 hours. In 2004, that was 6 hours and 21 minutes on a typical day, and 8 hours and 33 minutes multitasking. So it's up significantly. So why has that increased so much? It's mostly because now kids own their cell phones and their iPods. Over the past 5 years, ownership of the cell phones has gone up from 39% to 66%, and iPods up from 18% to 76% for iPods or MP3 players. Adolescents actually spend more time listening to music, playing games, or watching TV on their cell phones, 49 minutes a day, than actually talking on them, 33 minutes a day. And only 28% of kids have rules about how much time they can watch TV. 30% have rules about playing video games, and 36% have any kind of rules for the computer. They found when parents do set limits, children spend significantly less time with the media. Those with any rules at all consume nearly 3 hours less per day than those with no rules. So out of that 7 hours and 33 minutes, how much of that is TV? A lot. Most young people say the TV is on while they're eating. 45% say it's on most of the time, whether or not anyone's watching. So at the time of their survey, 8 to 18-year-olds were watching an average of 4 hours, 29 minutes of TV per day. So why does that matter? Because it makes a difference. So this study was done in 2004, or published in 2004 in Pediatrics. It was on watching sex on television predicts adolescent initiation of sexual behavior. So it was a survey of 1,792 adolescents from age 12 to 17. And what they did is they did a baseline and a 1-year follow-up interview of these adolescents. And the participants reported their viewing habits at baseline and their sexual experience at baseline and at follow-up. They responded also to measures of more than a dozen factors known to be associated with adolescent sexual initiation. And I didn't list all the measures, but some of them are social environment, parental monitoring, their grades, lower economic expectations, their educational aspirations. They did a mental health index, their self-esteem, adolescent risk behavior. So it was a fairly intensive survey, and they had actually done a paper prior to this where they didn't control for those factors, and this was a repeat to see if some of these associations held. And what they found was that watching sex on TV does predict initiation of sexual behavior. So they combined their TV viewing data with the results of a scientific content analysis of TV sexual content to determine how much these kids were exposed to sexual content on TV. And they divided up that TV sexual content into, did they actually view a sex scene, or were they just exposed to sex talk? And then also, was it sex talk that was combined with some risk of exposure to pregnancy, exposure to STDs, or was it somebody using safe sex? And actually, there's very few scenes. Out of those 5 scenes per hour, less than 1 in 7 has any kind of reference to sexual risk or safe sex. And I didn't put this in the slides, but actually, Latino adolescents, that's a protective factor if they view some of these sexual risk or safe sex scenes. But for some reason, it was only in Latino youth. The outcome measure that they looked at was initiation of intercourse. So over that 1-year period, did these adolescents start having sex? Or advancement in their non-coital sexual level. So did they go from kissing or pre-kissing to making out, which they defined as kissing for a long time, touching breasts or having their breasts touched, touching genitals or having their genitals touched, or giving or receiving oral sex. And these were their results. This first figure is the predicted probability of intercourse among virgins exposed to high versus low levels of TV sexual content. So did they start having sex? This top line were adolescents in the highest level of TV sex viewing, so in the top 90th percentile. And then this bottom line was the bottom 10th percentile. And what they found is it's approximately double across all age ranges. So these kids who viewed almost in the lowest 10th percentile were about half as likely to initiate intercourse over the 1-year period as the kids who were in the top 90th percentile. Figure 2 was just advancement in initiating breast touching, and it was about the same results. They were approximately double. And this is initiating genital touching, and again it was the same, approximately double. So that was without controlling for other variables. So they didn't control for any of those other things that they know are related to initiating intercourse or advancing in sexual stage, but it was strongly related. And then they did a lot of complicated analysis and math, and it still was a substantial association between exposure to TV sex and later sexual behavior. And this just says what I just said. It's approximately twice that. And it didn't matter if they were watching sex scenes or if they were just watching talk about sex. And so their conclusions was that watching sex on TV predicts and may hasten adolescent sexual initiation. So decreasing sexual content in entertainment programming, decreasing adolescent exposure to this content, or increasing depictions of negative consequences could delay adolescent sexual activity. What they found was that a 12-year-old who watches a sex-heavy TV diet is about the same as a 14-year-old who doesn't. It advanced them about 2 years in their age level. Alternately, parents may decrease the effects by watching TV with their children and discussing their own values and beliefs. So parents can have a protective influence. I'm going to skip this sex education in schools because of timing, except there was a study of sex education in schools. What they found was that kids who engage in earlier sexual initiation are kids with learning problems, kids who get poor grades, kids with social, behavioral, or emotional problems, kids from low-income families, some ethnic minorities, victims of physical and sexual abuse, kids whose parents have marital discord, and kids with low levels of parental supervision. And I note that because I'm going to talk a little bit more about how we can help with that later. And how good is sex education in schools? And kind of the bottom line of that is they need to start early, 5th or 6th grade. And abstinence only doesn't really work. We need abstinence plus HIV and contraception. And that doesn't confuse kids. They get the message that abstinence is best, but if you're going to start having sex, you need to do it in safe methods. And that's the same message that we need to give our kids when we talk to them about sex. So providers need to encourage parents to discuss sexuality and contraception consistent with their attitudes and values and beliefs beginning early in the child's life. And that was kind of their bottom line. So now to technique, what do we do? So there's a lot of stuff about that out there. And what I turned to, what I found was the most helpful was the National Campaign to Prevent Teen and Unplanned Pregnancy. They're nonprofit, nonpartisan, and supported largely by private donations, and they do a lot of research, and they have a lot of free materials. So this is a good source to go to and to refer parents to go to. And what they found is your relationship with your kids matter a lot. So teens who are close to their parents and feel supported by them are more likely to abstain from sex, wait until they're older to begin having sex, have fewer sexual partners, and use contraception more consistently. So it's really important for parents to discuss sex, love, and relationships directly with their children. But it's much more the quality of the relationship than any one actual talk that's protective. So we can't assume that just having one talk is going to do it, but we need to be there for our kids. One thing they've found is that we really need to be clear about our values. We often shy away from talking about sex and pregnancy with teens, maybe because we're uncomfortable, maybe some parents don't want to impose values on their kids. And a lot of parents didn't have a role model who did the same with them. We also have a culture that's increasingly tolerant of sex outside of marriage, unwed pregnancy, and parenthood, and a lot of parents feel conflicted about that. But it's pretty clear that, that adolescents are not ready for sex, and they are definitely not ready for parenthood. And so it's easy to be clear about that, at least, even if you're conflicted about sex outside of marriage. Other parents may be concerned about offending teen parents if their kids have friends who are unwed mothers or the children of teen mothers. But children need a clear message. So teens whose parents are clear about the value of abstinence or the dangers of unprotected sex are more likely to delay first intercourse and to use contraception. So kids need to know where we stand. Fewer than 5 out of 10 teens recently surveyed strongly agree that they are getting a clear message that teen pregnancy is wrong. So kids are unsure about where we stand. We need to supervise our kids. We have to know where they are, and that makes a difference. Teens whose parents supervise them are more likely to be older when they first have sex, have fewer partners, use contraception, and have less risk of pregnancy. But there's a line between supervision and very strict monitoring. If we're overbearing about it, that's associated with a higher risk of pregnancy. So that same relationship that helps protect young people from early sex also helps protect from violence, alcohol, other substance abuse, and school failure. So whether parents are concerned about drinking, smoking, drugs, violence, trouble in school, or sex, the advice is the same. Stay close to your teenage sons and daughters. They need you now. So just like we said earlier, parents often don't know when their kids have had sex. Only about 1/3 of sexually experienced 14-year-olds' parents believe they have had sex. So this survey in 2002 looked at 8th to 11th graders, and about half their parents were unaware that their sons and daughters had started to have sex, which is probably why our timing is so far off and why it's important for us to start early. It's also another plug for supervision. Okay. Two of the most powerful risk factors for early sex and pregnancy are one-on-one dating and age differences between partners. And you combine those two together, and it's almost a lethal combination. 13% of same-age relationships among those ages 12 to 14 include sexual intercourse. So it's important for our kids to go out in groups and learn about group dating before they get one-on-one and romantically involved. They're not really ready for that at young ages. If the partner's 2 years older, 26% of their relationships include sex. And if the partner is 3 or more years older, 33% of the relationships include sex. Oh, and finally, what do teens want adults to know? What would they like us to tell them? So this is from a survey by the National Campaign to Prevent Teen Pregnancy, and they asked a bunch of teens what we should tell them. And they said, talk to us honestly about sex, love, and relationships. First of all, just because we're young doesn't mean we can't fall in love or be interested in sex. These feelings are real and very powerful to us. Talk to us about all this without lectures. If you can't comfortably talk about it, find another adult who will. Second, show us what good, responsible relationships look like. We're as influenced by what you do as what you say. Third, show us why teen pregnancy is a bad idea. Hear directly from teen parents how hard it's been for them and why it can get in the way of reaching their goals. Telling us not to have sex is not enough, so you can't just lecture us. Explain why you feel that way if you do, and ask us what we think. So these are more discussions and conversations than me dispelling information to you. Tell us how you felt as a teen and understand that things may be different for us. Discuss emotions, not just health and safety. Kids this age are having a lot of trouble with their emotions and how to manage them, and that's one place we can really jump in and give them guidance. Listen to us and take our opinions seriously. Fifth, and very important, even if we don't ask, we still have questions. So we can't put this off just because our kids aren't bringing it up with us. Most kids won't. How do I know when having sex is the right thing to do? Should I wait until marriage? How far is too far for me or someone my age? How do I handle pressures from my friends? Will having sex make me popular? How do I know if I'm in love? How do I say no? If I don't start these conversations, you should. Whether we're having sex or not, we still need to be prepared. So even if you don't think your kids are having sex, they still need to hear these things. They need to know how to avoid pregnancy and STDs. That means information about abstinence and contraception, because when they do start, they need to be prepared. They need honest and helpful information from the people they trust most. We can't plan on the schools taking care of it. We can't plan on them getting the information from someone else. If we ask you about sex or contraception, don't assume we are already doing it. So that's important, not to create a culture where they can't ask questions and feel like they're going to be jumped on. We may just be curious, or we may just want to talk with someone we trust. And don't think giving us information about sex and birth control will encourage us to have sex. We need to know the facts so we can make good decisions in the future, maybe next week, next month, or years from now. 8, pay attention to us before we get in trouble. Reward us for doing the right thing, even when it seems like no big deal. Don't shower us with attention only when we're doing something wrong. Talk with us about our friends, our school, what we're interested in and worried about, even the latest gossip. Come to our games and school things. Show us that you care what is happening in our lives. And that goes to that relationship, building that relationship. And that's part of where some of our patients really struggle, is knowing how to build that relationship because they never had a model for that. 9, don't leave us alone so much. Sometimes we have sex because there's not much else to do. And that goes for drugs and alcohol and other places where supervision is really important. If you can't be home with us after school, make sure we have something to do that we really like, where there are other kids and adults who are comfortable with us. If we're at a party, make sure there's an adult around. That's part of our job as parents, to know where our kids are. 10, we really care what you think, even if we don't always act like it. Even though we may look all grown up, we still want your help and advice. But remember, your experiences are not the same as ours, and the choices we face are often different. When we don't end up doing exactly what you tell us to, don't think you've failed, and don't stop trying. So even with the eye rolling, your kids listen, and they hear what you say, and it does make a difference. I didn't put the statistics up here, but most kids appreciate getting this information from their parents, and they say that they report that their parents' opinions mean more to them than their friends and what the media says. So it's important that we tell our kids. 11, we hate the talk as much as you do. I'm sure y'all remember that from your getting the talk as a kid. Please don't sit us down for a sex talk. Instead, start talking with us about sex, love, and values when we're young. Keep the conversation going as we grow older. It helps to just take those teachable moments when you're watching TV with your kids, when you hear about something on the radio, when someone around you is pregnant, when those opportunities come up. Take advantage of those opportunities. And 12, for us, it's about abstinence and contraception. Understand that that's not confusing to kids. So to wrap up, start early. Initiate those conversations with your child, even about sex and sexuality, even if it's uncomfortable. Create an open environment where your kids feel they can share their feelings and concerns. Communicate your values clearly. Listen to your kids. Try to be honest. If they ask you questions, sometimes it's hard, your kids will catch you off guard, but be as honest and open as you feel you can. Be patient with them. Use everyday opportunities to talk, and talk about it again and again. Remember, they won't always remember that they've had the talk, so we need to reinforce. Any questions? Michael?
What about this idea of jumping too much too early, and like the idea of people talk about robbing kids of their innocence, that sort of thing?
Well, you don't want to flood kids.